Okay, in the last video, I talked about the impediments that are pretty common to having this friendly, amiable relationship with your husband and your children. The first one I talked about was illness, so obviously go to the doctor and figure that out. And here's what I'm going to say though about women with chronic illnesses. Okay, I am a woman with a very, very, very bad chronic illness, so I'm going to say that I can kind of speak to this. Okay, and I'm not gonna. I feel bad about lecturing people who are sick, but even if you're sick, even if you have a problem, even if you have lupus or fibromyalgia or rheumatoid arthritis or any of those things, your cheerfulness kind of has nothing to do with it in the end. Okay, so if you don't know what's wrong with you, of course that's going to cause a lot of sort of psychological distress. That's you're sick and you don't know why, and there's all sorts of problems there. But even if you are a sick person, you need to attend to the needs and the friendliness in that way, like your husband and your children's need for someone who is interested in them and likes being with them and wants to listen to them talk and is open and there for their family. Um, I know that that is a hard teaching, but we are told not to grumble and we are told to pick up our crosses. And one of the crosses that one must pick up if she is a mother with a chronic illness is that she still has to present as a loving and kind spouse and a fun, happy wife despite her illness. I have a friend who died of metastatic cancer last year, and that woman was cheerful and happy with her husband. I've talked to him about this. She is a saintly woman. Um, and I've talked at length with her husband about her behavior at home and how she managed her household and how she talked to her children. This woman was on chemotherapy for 8 years, my friends. And he said that she bore her suffering with joy the entire time. Does this mean that she didn't suffer? No, of course she suffered. She was probably a nervous wreck deep down inside. Like she probably was terrified of leaving her family and she was probably in a lot of pain. And, she had a lot of these. It's not that she didn't care that she had cancer. It's not that she didn't care about these things. It's not that they weren't harming her. It's that she took that cross up with joy and she presented herself as a loving and kind and affectionate mother. This is a woman I have just tremendous respect for. And maybe I'll make a whole video about her sometime because she was just such a remarkable person. Like I cannot believe that I knew this woman, but she always was kind and cheerful and loving towards her husband. I've talked to him about it and he's told me, I asked him, I was like, did she, how were her energy levels? And he's like, I couldn't keep up with her. He's like, I couldn't keep up. He's like, I could go to bed and she was still up dealing with the kids and like being sweet and happy. And, so if this woman can do that, and the reason she could do it is because she had grace from God. It's not because and of course she was endowed with her own gifts, but the reason that she was able to be such a light to her family and her community and her husband, despite being very sick with cancer, is because she asked for grace from God. Okay, so if you are sick, God intends for you to take that suffering that you are feeling because of your sickness. He intends you to take that and acknowledge it. He doesn't want you to run away from it. He wants you to acknowledge it. He wants you to pick up your cross, and then you will ask him for the grace to get through what it is that you have to get through. God never intends us to be cranky and difficult and moody women. It's not intend that for us, okay? So that's what I'm going to say about that. So obviously get treatment, but then also pick up your cross and just move forward with cheerfulness and joy despite what you are going through. And I understand. I have stage 4 cancer. I have 6 children and a job. And I don't work that much, but I do work. And I can still, like, through the grace of God, this is not because of me, but it's because, I ask God to help me with this every day. Or to try to pick up my cross and to be closer to him and to use everything that we know about prayer and stuff like that to try and bring a light to the world. Okay. And I'm not saying I'm like super happy all the time. I'm not. I have my moments. Don't get me wrong. I have my moments, but I'm just saying anybody who's watching this that has an illness, like I understand. I'm not telling you to do anything that I'm not trying to do myself. I'll say I'm trying to do this. I'm not necessarily a master of it. Okay. So that's the first thing. So if you have a chronic, you have an illness, like, okay, well, you do. And you still are duty bound to be a cheerful and pleasant companion. Um, so the next one is that I was talking about children sort of running their mother ragged. And, a solution to this is to teach your kids boundaries. You need to discipline your children. You can't let your children get away with too much. And I think personally, sometimes I forget to discipline my kids. Like I'm just like not even, I don't know. I like go into this other zone where they're making demands on me. And it's like, it doesn't even occur to me that I should stop them sometimes. I don't know if that makes sense, but especially with like the little guys, when you've already raised like these 4 kids and then you add another 2 and it's like they do things and you're like, oh, and then it's like by the end of the day, you're so crabby. So your children need to be properly disciplined. You need to teach your children how to also be likable people that you want to be around. They're not going to learn this by osmosis. Okay. So when your children are crabby or your children speak to you in a way that is not appropriate, don't let them get away with that. You need to discipline them immediately. Do not let children get into the habit of being a pain in the butt. There's all sorts of ways to raise children in the Christian faith that will teach them how to separate their emotions from their behaviors. And so we're not going to teach children that their emotions don't matter if a child is angry or whatever, but we're going to teach them how to process those feelings and then respond in a healthy way to the rest of their family and how to interact with a family. And you want to break this cycle of like weird demanding behavior that children have, because they're going to carry that into their family life, and they're going to be difficult wives. They're going to be difficult husbands because you didn't discipline them on how to be in a family with, and learn to have like a respectful, cheerful attitude. Okay. Your kids need boundaries. All right. They need boundaries, and it is fine for you to take time away from your children. It's fine for you to say to your kids, I am praying now. I am in my closet for 20 minutes or whatever you need. Don't bother me. I personally need to wake up like a good 2 hours before my kids, or an hour before my kids wake up, because I need to get my prayers in before they wake up. I need to have some scripture study, and I need to get started on my day and sort of look at my calendar and figure out what I have to do so that my world doesn't fall apart. And the next, also in this, I'm going to add, when it comes to your children need a happy, cheerful, calm mom. They don't need a mom that keeps the house perfectly clean, and they don't need a mom that does the laundry perfectly, and they don't need a mom that cooks and cleans and, keeps everything absolutely perfect in that way. That is a bit of a trap that women sometimes fall into, where we try to kind of express love to our children by keeping the house clean and stuff like that. Yes, it is important to keep your house clean. Yes, all of that is good. But in the order of things, your overall attitude is more important. So, but maybe I'll talk about that in the next video. I'm going to figure out when to talk about that. Anyway, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Like this is kind of, this is sort of the top of one of the top of the importance in a family is your attitude and your friendship with your children and your husband. The next one I talked about was, you don't actually like your husband. So I'm going to say a couple things about this. First of all, I'm going to assume that your husband is not an alcoholic. He's not abusing you physically or, severe emotional abuse. And by severe emotional abuse, I mean like really nasty put downs, like, telling you you're worthless, telling you, that kind of stuff, or threatening violence. So I'm going to assume that your husband doesn't have a drug problem and that he's not committing adultery. Now, when it comes to the solutions I'm assuming you have a normal marriage, but even if any of those things are happening, you could still learn something from this, because it's certainly not going to hurt. You're not going to convince your husband to stop cheating on you by being crabby. Or you're not going to, with physical abuse, you should just pack up your bags immediately and leave your house. Like just go, because it's such a danger. Like if a man is physically abusing you, it's just, he's so dangerous. Like you have to get out, but that's beyond the scope of this. But like if your husband is an alcoholic or something, like you being mad at him all the time isn't actually going to help with that. You can, like I have my opinions on what to do with a spouse who's an alcoholic, which basically means, I think you should leave them until they get themselves straightened out, kick them out. But even still, even if your husband is like vastly like off the charts of like, he's just a really destructive person, learning how to be sort of cheerful and friendly with your own children, this is still part of the equation, and it will help your children kind of get through whatever difficulty they're having with their dad. But I'm assuming that you're in a normal marriage with a normal man that's not cheating on you, not beating you, and not snorting cocaine and doing drugs or drinking. So with a man who's otherwise normal, that you don't like, well, at some point in your life, you did like this guy. You did like him. And in the last video, I was saying, like, sometimes if you jumped into a sexual relationship too soon, it could be that you're sort of clouded because you don't really know if you didn't intellectually necessarily decide that to be with this guy. Like, you have a physical bond to him and possibly like soul ties. But somewhere along the lines, you enjoyed being around this guy. And so think about what you were doing before that made him more tolerable to be around it. Now, you might be saying to me, my husband disappears. This is something I hear a lot, actually, from women that are in sort of a difficult relationship or in a relationship that's like got this kind of tension. You know, mom's crabby, dad comes home. He doesn't want to deal with crabby mom. He disappears. He goes into his man cave, plays video games, whatever. So let's just take that scenario for a second. Okay, so your husband comes home. The first thing you should do when you meet your spouse, when you see your spouse, is smile at them. Just say smile and say, hi, I'm so happy to see you, and give them a kiss. Then allow your husband a little bit of time alone because, as I said, you need time alone. He needs time alone. Tell him, say, hey, babe, go in the basement, go in your man cave, go do what you need to do. Okay. But you should be giving that to him. You should be supporting him in his little time alone that he has. That shouldn't be something that he's demanding from you, because I think a lot of that is this sort of when people feel like their spouse isn't caretaking their need for privacy. Sometimes it can get really draining. And of course, ideally, your husband would do the same thing for you, but he probably won't. He just probably won't. I mean, for whatever reason, men aren't the best at doing these things. I don't know why. There's a lot of reasons why. But anyway, so when he comes in the house, and he's like going down to his man cave, he's being a crabby pants, just, he comes in, give him a kiss. Why don't you go take a little time for yourself? Or what I think is more ideal is when dad comes home or when you both come home from work is to tell your kids to leave you alone and sit down and have a drink with your husband. I don't drink alcohol. Have a soda. I don't know. But sit down and have a little bit of time with him. Okay, just the two of you to talk a little bit. You need to try to carve out ways that you two can bond together. And I know that it's very difficult, especially if your husband seems like he's an unwilling partner and he is distant or crabby or whatever. And like I said in the last video, there could be a million reasons why this is happening. It's not necessarily as simple. People make this out to be really simple, like where they're like, oh, it's just because the wife is crabby. It's like, no, that's not necessarily true. And especially if your husband is, I kind of want to make a short about this actually, but if your husband is exceptionally intelligent, if you have a husband that's like exceptionally intelligent, I'm talking like IQ 130, 140, their emotional world is going to be deep and profound, and they're going to have a lot of like emotional breakdowns and like existential crises, okay? A man who is, men are not as simple as we like to make them out to be. There are simple men and there are simple women, but there are a good number of men that are not simple, not necessarily that easy to please, that have their own internal turmoils and they have their own personalities. And actually, from what I've read in psychology, men actually have a much broader range of extremes when it comes to personality. So you have these like extreme personalities with men. And for whatever reason, we like to pretend that they're all the same. They're not all the same. And every man has his own needs and his wants. And so there's no one way to fix this problem if your husband is unhappy or if he's miserable, okay? What you need to do is to think about what God expects of you. You need to be a little bit more self-interested, but also recognize that, again, if your husband is, if he has these sort of character issues, that those are there to perfect you. So just embrace the suffering of a spouse that might be less than friendly with you, or less than, if he is these ways, like God intends that to be the way that it is, and just embrace your suffering. And if these problems are really serious, like, you have to take action. But if it's just, like a low level, like this guy's a crabby pants, well, do what you can and be the most virtuous and sweet and loving wife that you can be. But at the end of the day, I can't promise that this is going to help, and it might not, but it will help your soul. And that's all that really matters. Your soul matters more than anything else. You always have to attend to your own soul first. So yeah, so with a guy you don't like, though, you're gonna have to figure out kind of how to overcome that in your actions. So you might have to play act a little bit. You might have to just pretend that you like your husband. But do be sweet, do be friendly, do try to do fun things together, carve out time for date nights, things like that, and try to kind of rekindle that friendship. But, tease him a little bit, make jokes with him, be a light and cheerful personality. And if you don't know how to be a light and cheerful person, look around for videos, and maybe I could find some and link them on how to be a charming woman, because there are ways that you can learn how to be charming and sweet. But just try and have that kind of, amiable lightness towards your husband. So, when you guys see each other first thing in the morning, what do? Maybe take a week and observe the way that you talk to your husband, and then write down the overall, like every time you talk to your husband, what did you say? Try to see if you can find a journal. I know this morning, like I was trying to edit a video that I made about this last night, and it was a hot mess, so I didn't post it. And I was trying to edit this morning when my husband came downstairs with coffee, and he walked in the room, and I was like, oh, I'm editing this video, and I'm like not looking at him, and I'm not trying to engage with him. And then I was like, okay, well, like that's a fail on my part. Like when your husband walks in the room, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You stop what you're doing and look up at him and smile and act as though you're happy to see him. A lot of this is just habit formation. Okay. So just if you don't want to be kind to your husband, well, then you shouldn't have gotten married. Sorry. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be married. All right. This is St. Paul tells wives to do this. You best do this. This is a commandment. Essentially, it's not a commandment exactly, but it's in scripture. This is divinely inspired scripture. And you do not get to decide how to respond to divinely inspired scripture. Like you're an obligation to do this. So I'm sorry if he's a crab. I'm sorry if he doesn't help you around the house. I'm sorry that all of that stuff is happening. But again, like your feelings about this don't really matter. It's your virtue that matters. And so if you feel like you don't really want to do any of this because your husband is a pain, but I'm sorry, but you're obligated to do it. And so, yeah, definitely like observe your behavior and try to speak to your husband in a way that is cheerful and kind and loving most of the time. Don't say mean things to him. Don't belittle him. Don't say snotty things. Never be snotty. Never be bitchy. Just polite, kind, cheerful behavior. Talk to your husband like you would, I don't know, your boss, if you have a job or if you've ever had a job. Are you snotty with your boss? I hope not. Although I have noticed sometimes women that are snotty with their bosses are also snotty with their husbands. So just, think about that. Just think about it. Okay. So the next impediment I believe I said was sort of your base personality. That can be really challenging to overcome because it is your personality. But again, I'm going to say that a lot of this stuff is simply habit. So you can be a quiet, more contemplative person and still be kind and loving towards your spouse. You can be a more melancholic person and still be kind and loving. And you might just not be quite as cheerful, like happy, but you can still be like a calm and kind presence that is happy to see him. You can still smile, that kind of thing, right? And if you're more of a choleric personality, you can definitely dial that back and learn not to be like super like about everything all the time. I'm sanguine, and I sort of run choleric sometimes. I can be very impassioned, and I have to sort of moderate that in like, especially if my husband and I are in some sort of a fight, I have to moderate my speech quite a bit, or else I can just things just shoot out of my mouth that are quite damaging. So I totally feel you on the like choleric, if you're a choleric woman. I mean, I lean more sanguine, but yeah. Or if you're phlegmatic and you're kind of more introverted and lazy, maybe, sorry, but again, just take time to notice how you interact with your husband from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed. And even go so far as to have a journal. You're going to want to, like, the first step in fixing these problems is to observe your own behavior. And you're going to need to, of course, have an examination of conscience every night. That is, a must. You can't grow in holiness unless you're looking at, you're examining your conscience. And then the next one I talked about was how a lot of women, like you might have never developed a friendship with your husband before you got married, which is going to be a bit of a problem. If you guys had some passionate sexual love for each other, and you don't even need to be necessarily having sex for this to be the case, but if you guys had some sort of like impassioned, um, baby, baby, baby. If you guys had some sort of impassioned, wild courtship where like again, you don't even necessarily needed to be having sex, but you're, but if that was the forefront of your mind, you're going to run into problems later on in your marriage because your marriage was based on sexual love only. And of course, sex is a really important part of marriage. That is a huge part of marriage. But if that's the foundation of your marriage, if you had this super hot sex life and then you got married and you had kids and suddenly that's not something that you can really rely on anymore, which is something, when you're going through childbirth and breastfeeding and all that stuff like that, I think I see this all the time where women, men will complain that their wives were super hot to trot before they got married and then they got married and like everything died out. And I personally think that's because the only thing those people had was sex. And if that's the only thing you have, if you don't have that baseline friendship, your marriage is just going to completely fall apart because the sexual aspects of marriage are quite fickle. They're quite fickle. I mean, you could get sick, you could be pregnant, you could be postpartum, you could have impotency issues, you could have all sorts of problems that can come up that will affect sex. But your basic friendship, nothing can rock that. If you have a solid friendship with your husband, nothing can rock that. Nothing will get in the way of that unless you have a brain tumor and your personality completely changes. But like if you really, really enjoy a friendship with your husband, and so, go back and like look at your courtship and how, that was all established. And also consider a little bit whether or not you in general as a woman are able to maintain platonic male relationships with men. Because if you don't have this sort of jovial, friendly behavior or attitude, it's going to come across in all of the relationships that you have with men. So this would be work colleagues. This would be people that you know from church. This would be couples that you guys are friends with. And I will say my husband's a super quiet guy, but the women that he really likes to be around among my friend group, the married women that he enjoys their company when the husband and the wife come over, are the women that are very sweet and friendly and kind. And they just have this sort of lightness about them. And he really enjoys being around those women and not in a romantic way. But men in general should enjoy being around you. And if they don't, if you've got that kind of like acidic, like bitchy attitude that some women develop as they get older or start when they're younger, or if you have that real chip on your shoulder, that's going to affect your marriage because it shows a lack of skill when it comes to your social life. And so a lot of relating to your husband in a friendly way is simply a skill that you should have developed as a young woman, but most of us don't develop those because the idea of women needing more than just sex or a career is very foreign on our culture right now. It used to be that women were trained in the art of charm. Women were trained to be charming and sweet and kind and an easy companion to be around. If you think back on the way that courtships used to happen, again, people were not having sex with each other. They were friends, and especially in more kind of like high society. But I'm pretty sure this was in the normal culture too, but it's just we don't have a lot of access to information about those people because people didn't really write about them. But if you look in the way that women of a higher society were raised, they were raised to be charming and interesting, and they could talk to men about all sorts of subjects. They were smart. And I think like our Christian culture used to understand the importance of these skills, and now that is sort of lost on us. So if you never learned the skill of being a pleasant companion, there's time to learn that, and you can totally study the way to do this. But there's a ton of information out there that could help you. Again, like just look up videos about being charming and witty and fun and whatever. Okay. All right, I'm going to the next video and then I'm going to finish up.